The avoidant has ended the romantic relationship. The avoidant has made it clear they are not willing to commit, not willing to be vulnerable, not willing to meet the person halfway. The avoidant has rejected the person, has created distance, has withdrawn the romantic dimension, and then, almost immediately, the avoidant offers a new proposition: friendship. The avoidant suggests they can still be in the person's life, just differently. The avoidant frames this as mature, as rational, as the best way to honor what they had while accepting romantic partnership is not possible. And the person refuses. The person declines the friendship. The person says, "No, I do not want to be your friend. I do not want to maintain connection with you. I do not want you in my life in any capacity." The person decides they are worth more than friendship with someone who rejected them, that they deserve better than a diluted version of a person, that they cannot be in the avoidant's life while healing. This refusal changes something fundamental in the avoidant's understanding of the situation. This refusal is different from all the other refusals. This is not the person refusing to accept the avoidant's distance. This is the person refusing to accept the avoidant at all. This is the person choosing themselves over the possibility of having the avoidant in any form, and this hits the avoidant in a way that nothing else has. The avoidant assumed the person would accept friendship. The avoidant assumed the person would rather have the avoidant in a reduced capacity than lose them entirely. The avoidant assumed the person's love was so dependent on the avoidant's presence that the person would take whatever form of the avoidant they could get. But the person has refused, and this refusal means something very specific. The person is no longer available. The person is no longer an option. The person has finally, truly moved on. The avoidant's expectation of gratitude. When the avoidant offers friendship, they often believe they are being magnanimous. They offer to keep the person in their life, to remain connected, to not completely sever the relationship. They frame this as a gift, as something generously offered despite the romantic relationship not working out. The avoidant expects the person to be grateful. They expect the person to recognize they are getting to keep the avoidant in some form, that they are not losing them entirely, that friendship is better than nothing. They imagine the person will accept with appreciation, recognizing that the avoidant is trying to be kind. What the avoidant does not realize is that friendship with an avoidant after romantic rejection is not a gift. It is not a kindness. Friendship with someone who has rejected you, who has kept you at distance, who has shown their limitations, is not something to be grateful for. The avoidant is not being magnanimous. The avoidant is being self-serving, trying to keep the person available without the obligation of commitment. Why the refusal is different from everything else. Throughout the relationship, the person has been refusing things. The person has been refusing to accept the avoidant's distance as permanent. The person has been refusing to accept that the relationship cannot be different. The person has been refusing to give up hope that the avoidant might change. The avoidant has become accustomed to these refusals. The avoidant has learned to interpret the person's refusals as evidence that the person does not understand, does not see reality clearly, does not accept the situation as it is. But the refusal to be friends is different. This refusal is not based on hope that the avoidant will change. This refusal is not based on the belief that the relationship can be different. This refusal is based on something much more definitive. The person's decision that the avoidant is not worth having in their life in any capacity. The person is not refusing friendship because the person is still holding on to romantic hopes. The person is refusing friendship because the person has recognized that the avoidant is not capable of being what the person needs, and the person does not want to settle for less. This refusal demonstrates something the avoidant has not seen before: the person's capacity to choose themselves. The person is not choosing the avoidant in a reduced form. The person is choosing to be alone, to heal without the avoidant's presence, to rebuild without the complication of maintaining connection with someone who hurt them. The person is choosing themselves, and this choice is shocking to the avoidant because it means the person is no longer available. The person has stopped trying to make the relationship work. The person has stopped trying to accommodate the avoidant's needs. The person has stopped making space for the avoidant in their life. The person has made the decision that the avoidant's presence, even in friendship form, is not worth the cost to the person's own well-being. And this decision is profound because it means the avoidant has finally lost the person entirely. The person is not coming back. The person is not going to reconsider if the avoidant changes. The person is not going to remain available as an option. The person is moving forward without the avoidant. The loss of the backup option. What the avoidant has lost with the person's refusal is the backup option. The avoidant has become accustomed to knowing the person is still there, still available, still willing to engage. The avoidant has believed that if they ever wanted to reach out, if they ever wanted to maintain connection, the person would be accessible. Friendship served as a way to keep this option alive. It meant the avoidant could occasionally text, maintain casual contact, know the person was still thinking about them. Friendship meant the avoidant could appear in the person's life when they felt like it, could take up space in the person's consciousness. But the person's refusal removes this option entirely. The person is no longer available. The person is not going to respond to texts. The person is not going to remain interested in what the avoidant is doing. The person has closed the door not just on romance, but on any relationship. This is devastating to the avoidant in ways the romantic rejection alone was not. The romantic rejection hurt, but the avoidant could tell themselves the person still cared. But the refusal of friendship means the person is rejecting the avoidant entirely. The person is saying, "I do not want you in my life at all." How the refusal communicates something the avoidant could not ignore. When the person refuses friendship, the person is communicating something very clearly to the avoidant. The person is communicating, "You hurt me. You hurt me enough that I do not want you in my life at all. You hurt me enough that I value my own well-being more than I value the possibility of maintaining any form of connection with you." The person is communicating that the pain caused by the avoidance distance, the avoidance coldness, the avoidance rejection is significant enough to warrant a complete separation. This communication is impossible for the avoidant to ignore or reinterpret. The person is not being ambiguous. The person is not leaving room for the avoidant to believe that someday things might change, that someday the person might be willing to be friends. The person is drawing a clear boundary and communicating that this boundary is permanent. The avoidant cannot tell themselves that the person just needs time, that the person will eventually be ready to be friends, that the person is just hurt right now and will change their mind. The person's refusal is too clear, too direct, too final. The avoidant has to accept that they have completely lost the person. The avoidant has to accept that whatever chance might have existed for them to remain connected has been severed by the avoidant's own behavior. This forces the avoidant to confront something they have probably been avoiding. The person was right. The person was right to refuse the friendship. The person was right to recognize that they deserve better. The person was right to choose themselves. The avoidant is being confronted in the person's refusal with the knowledge that the person understands their own worth, understands what they deserve, and is not willing to compromise on that. The realization that the person has actually left. Up until the refusal of friendship, the avoidant could maintain a fantasy. The fantasy was that the person was still there, that even if the romantic relationship had ended, some version of the person was still accessible to the avoidant. The fantasy was that the person would eventually adjust to the new arrangement, would eventually accept friendship, would eventually be willing to maintain connection on the avoidant's terms. But the refusal of friendship shatters this fantasy completely. The avoidant is forced to recognize that the person has actually left. The person is not coming back for friendship. The person is not going to accept a reduced version of the relationship. The person is not going to remain available. The person has made a clean break. This realization is different from the realization of the romantic breakup. When the romantic relationship ended, the avoidant could still imagine that they and the person were connected, that some bond remained, that the separation was not final. But the refusal of friendship makes the separation final. There is no intermediate state. There is no friendship. There is no connection. There is only the person's complete absence from the avoidant's life. This is when the avoidant realizes that they have completely lost the person. This is when the avoidant understands that the choices they made, the distance they created, the coldness they maintained, the vulnerability they refused, have resulted in permanent loss. The person is not just gone from the avoidant's romantic life. The person is gone entirely. The person is no longer available in any form. This realization often arrives with a sense of shock and finality. The avoidant has been operating under the assumption that they had more time, that they had more chances, that they could eventually fix things, or at least maintain some level of connection. But the person's refusal to be friends removes all these assumptions. The person is no longer negotiating. The person is no longer offering compromises. The person is simply gone. What this refusal reveals about the person's strength. The person's refusal to be friends reveals something essential. The person has strength. The person has the strength to refuse what they do not want, to set boundaries, to choose themselves over the possibility of having the avoidant in any form. This strength is something the avoidant may not have recognized in the person before. Throughout the relationship, the person may have seemed accommodating, may have seemed willing to accept what the avoidant was offering, may have seemed to prioritize the avoidant's needs, but the person's refusal of friendship reveals that this accommodation was a choice. not a weakness. The person has the capacity to refuse. The person has the capacity to walk away. The person has the capacity to prioritize their own well-being. The avoidant may find themselves revising their understanding of the person. The avoidant may realize that the person was not foolish for staying as long as they did. The avoidant may realize that the person was not weak for continuing to love the avoidant. The avoidant may realize that the person's willingness to stay was not desperation, but conscious choice, and the person's decision to leave is not weakness, but strength. This recognition can be destabilizing for the avoidant because it undermines the narrative that the avoidant has been telling themselves about the person. The avoidant thought the person was dependent on them, needed them, would not be okay without them. But the person's refusal to be friends suggests something different. The person is okay without the avoidant, is capable of being alone, is willing to be alone rather than compromise their own well-being. How the refusal changes. The avoidant's future options. The person's refusal to be friends also changes what options the avoidant has going forward. The avoidant can no longer reach out to the person. The avoidant can no longer maintain casual contact. The avoidant can no longer appear in the person's life when the avoidant feels like it. The avoidant can no longer rely on the person being available. This changes the avoidant's relationship to their own behavior. The avoidant can no longer distance themselves and then come back to the person when they feel like reconnecting. The avoidant can no longer pull away and then rely on the person to still be there. The avoidant can no longer treat the person as a backup option that will always be available. The avoidant's other relationships will now be different because the avoidant no longer has the person as a fallback. If future relationships become difficult, the avoidant can no longer think of reaching out to the person. If future relationships end, the avoidant can no longer imagine the person being receptive to reconnection. The person is no longer an option at all. This can be particularly difficult for an avoidant who has become accustomed to having multiple people available as options. The avoidant has learned to keep people in orbit, to maintain access to multiple connections, to never fully commit to one person, because there are always alternatives. But the person's refusal to be friends removes one of those alternatives. The person is no longer in orbit. The person has left the avoidant's solar system entirely. What the avoidant must accept. The avoidant must accept that they have received the ultimate consequence of their behavior. The avoidant must accept that their distance has resulted in complete loss. The avoidant must accept that the person they rejected is no longer available, not just romantically, but at all. The avoidant must accept that they have pushed the person away so completely that the person is not coming back. The avoidant must accept that friendship was never going to be an option once they ended the romantic relationship. The avoidant must accept that the person understood, from the moment the avoidant offered friendship, what was actually being offered. A way for the avoidant to keep the person available without vulnerability. The avoidant must accept that the person rejected this, not out of hurt that might heal, but out of clear-eyed recognition that the avoidant was not worth having in any form. The avoidant must accept that they had their chance, and the chance has passed. The avoidant must accept that if they had been different, if they had been vulnerable, if they had been willing to commit, the person might still be in their life, but they were not different, and the person is gone. This acceptance is what allows the avoidant, if they are willing, to finally grow. This acceptance is what forces the avoidant to confront their own patterns, their own defenses, their own inability to be vulnerable. This acceptance is what makes it impossible for the avoidant to maintain the narrative that they were right about the person, about the relationship, about the need for distance. The person's refusal to be friends is the final word in the narrative between the avoidant and the person. The person is saying, I am done. I am not going to participate in your life in any way. I am not going to remain an option. I am not going to keep myself available for you. I am going to move forward without you, and I am not going to look back. And the avoidant has to accept this. The avoidant has to live with the knowledge that they have completely lost someone who was willing to love them, who was willing to stay, who was willing to be vulnerable. The avoidant has to live with the knowledge that this person is no longer available because of the choices the avoidant made. The refusal of friendship is not a final wound. The refusal of friendship is a final closure. It is the person closing a door and locking it, making it clear that this door will not open again. The avoidant is left standing outside the door, unable to reach the person, unable to maintain connection, unable to do anything except accept that the person is gone and that they deserve to be gone, given everything the avoidant put them through. The avoidant's misunderstanding of what friendship means. The avoidant often misunderstands what friendship means in this context. The avoidant believes that friendship is a diluted version of a romantic relationship, that friendship is something to settle for, that friendship is better than nothing. But friendship with an avoidant after romantic rejection is not a standard friendship. It is a mechanism for the avoidant to maintain access to the person without vulnerability. Standard friendships are based on mutual care, mutual investment, mutual presence. But friendship offered by an avoidant after romantic rejection is based on the avoidant's need to keep the person available without the obligation of commitment. The avoidant is essentially asking the person to remain emotionally connected while accepting that the avoidant will never offer genuine reciprocal care. This is not friendship. This is a continuation of the pattern that has defined the relationship. The avoidant is still asking the person to sacrifice, to be available, to invest in the connection without receiving equal investment back. The avoidant is still maintaining the asymmetry that has characterized the romantic relationship. The person who refuses this friendship is recognizing what it actually is, not friendship, but a perpetuation of harm. The person is recognizing that accepting this friendship would mean continuing to show up for someone who has shown they are not capable of showing up for the person. The person is recognizing that friendship with an avoidant after the avoidant has rejected them romantically would simply extend the suffering indefinitely. The avoidant does not understand this. The avoidant believes they are offering something generous, something kind, something the person should accept with gratitude. But the person sees clearly what is being offered, more of the same. The person sees the offer of friendship as an attempt to keep the person available without requiring anything in return from the avoidant. Why the avoidant cannot accept the boundary. When the person refuses friendship, the avoidant often cannot accept this boundary. The avoidant tries to negotiate, tries to convince the person that friendship would be good for both of them, tries to reframe the refusal as something the person will regret. The avoidant cannot accept that the person has made a final decision and is not changing it. This inability to accept the boundary reveals something fundamental about how the avoidant relates to boundaries. The avoidant does not respect boundaries that limit their own access. The avoidant respects the boundaries they set, the distance they create, the vulnerability they refuse, the commitment they will not make, but the avoidant struggles to respect boundaries set by others, particularly boundaries that limit their ability to access the person. The avoidant experiences the person's refusal to be friends as a rejection of the avoidant's magnanimity, a rejection of the avoidant's attempt to be mature and rational about the end of the relationship. The avoidant cannot see that the person is setting a boundary out of self-respect, out of recognition that the person deserves better, out of determination to move forward without the avoidant. The avoidant's difficulty accepting this boundary often leads to escalation. The avoidant may become more insistent, may try to find ways around the boundary, may continue to reach out despite the person's clear refusal. The avoidant is trying to force the person to reconsider, is trying to prove that friendship is possible, is trying to maintain access to the person despite the person's explicit refusal, but each escalation only reinforces the person's decision. Each attempt to override the boundary only confirms that the person made the right choice in refusing friendship. Each insistence that they should be friends only proves that the avoidant has not learned to respect the person's needs, the person's boundaries, or the person's right to choose what happens in their own life. The permanent nature of the refusal. Unlike other breakdowns in the relationship, the person's refusal to be friends is typically permanent. The person is not refusing friendship as a temporary response to hurt. The person is refusing friendship as a final decision about what the person wants in their life going forward. This permanence is what makes the refusal different from everything else the person has refused. During the relationship, the person's refusals were often temporary. The person refused to accept the coldness one day but came back to try again the next day. The person refused to accept the distance 1 week but recommitted to working on the relationship the next week. The person's refusals were temporary because the person was still hopeful that things could change. But the refusal of friendship is not temporary. This refusal is based on the person's acceptance that things will not change, that the avoidant is not capable of being what the person needs, that maintaining connection with the avoidant is not in the person's interest. This refusal is based on the person finally giving up hope. The avoidant must learn to accept that this refusal is permanent. The avoidant cannot wait the person out. The avoidant cannot hope that the person will eventually reconsider. The avoidant cannot believe that if they change, the person will suddenly want to be friends. The person's refusal is not conditional. The person's refusal is absolute. This permanence is what transforms the refusal from a communication about the relationship to a communication about the person's commitment to their own well-being. The person is not just saying no to friendship. The person is saying, I am committed to my own healing. I am committed to my own growth. I am committed to my own life, and you are no longer part of it. What the avoidant can learn from the refusal. If the avoidant is capable of learning, the refusal of friendship can teach the avoidant something essential. The refusal can teach the avoidant that people have limits, that people will eventually stop accommodating, that people will eventually choose themselves. The refusal can teach the avoidant that vulnerability is not weakness, that commitment is not trap, that allowing someone to matter to you is not a loss of control. The refusal can teach the avoidant that they pushed away someone valuable, someone aware, someone intelligent enough to know what they were doing and brave enough to do it anyway. The refusal can teach the avoidant that the person was not dependent on them, was not foolish for staying as long as they did, was not desperate for the avoidant's presence. The refusal can teach the avoidant about the cost of maintaining emotional distance at all costs. The refusal can teach the avoidant that the freedom the avoidant thought they were protecting through distance is actually just isolation. The refusal can teach the avoidant that the autonomy the avoidant thought was essential is actually just loneliness. But most avoidants do not learn these lessons. Most avoidants cannot accept the refusal as a reflection of their own behavior. Most avoidants will continue to believe that the person made a mistake, that the person should have accepted the friendship, that the person will regret the refusal. Most avoidants will never fully understand why the person left, will never fully accept that they deserve to be left, will never fully internalize the lesson that the refusal is trying to teach. For the small percentage of avoidants who can learn, the refusal becomes a turning point. The refusal becomes the moment when the avoidant finally realizes that they have been the problem. The refusal becomes the moment when the avoidant finally commits to changing. But this turning point comes only if the avoidant is capable of genuine self-reflection and genuine willingness to change. For most avoidants, the refusal is just another wound, another rejection, another reason to reinforce the belief that relationships are dangerous and people cannot be trusted.